So, to start things off today, I want you to imagine a castle. Just picture this massive, imposing stone fortress in your mind.
Okay, I'm picturing it. Like a classic medieval setup.
Right, exactly. You are standing right outside the moat, and you're looking up at these walls. And from where you're standing, I mean, it looks absolutely flawless.
Totally impenetrable.
Exactly. The guards are on patrol, the drawbridge is pulled up tight, and the stonework just looks completely seamless.
You're like, there's no way in.
Right. But if you were to somehow get close enough to the wall, if you had the time and, the patience to run your hands along every single stone, you'd eventually find one that is loose.
Just one loose stone.
Just one. And
Yeah.
if you push on that one specific stone, the entire wall comes crumbling down.
Wow. That imagery perfectly visualizes the core concept we are examining on the deep dive
It
today.
really does.
Because that single loose stone is what the source material refers to as the thumbscrew. And what's fascinating and maybe honestly a bit terrifying is that every single person has one.
Every single one of us.
You have one. I have one. No matter how thick the armor appears from the outside, there is a loose stone.
Yeah, and that brings us to the actual source we are pulling this concept from today. We're doing a deep dive into Robert Greene's book, The 48 Laws of Power.
Specifically Law 33, right?
Right, Law 33, which is discover each man's thumbscrew. We are unpacking what is really a highly Machiavellian manual on human nature.
Yeah, we're looking at how vulnerabilities like deep-seated insecurities, hidden pleasures, maybe unresolved childhood needs, how those can be identified and leveraged.
And I think we need to make a really important disclaimer right here at the top.
Absolutely, we definitely do.
Because regarding the nature of this text, we are impartially reporting on the strategies contained in this source material.
We are not endorsing ruthless manipulation here.
No, not at all. We are just looking at the mechanics of psychological leverage. Because the reality is, people out there do use these tactics.
They do, every single day.
And by understanding how these mechanics work, you can better understand the world around you. And ultimately, you can recognize when someone is, running their hands along your own castle walls.
Right, because understanding the offense is really the only reliable way to build a functional defense.
Exactly.
If you don't know what your own loose stone looks like or the methods someone else might use to find it, you are leaving yourself incredibly exposed.
You're wide open.
Yeah. And the text approaches human psychology not as a mystery to be solved with, say, therapy, but as a mechanism to be understood and manipulated, according to the book's philosophy anyway.
So to set the table for how this mechanism actually functions in practice, there's this fable by the 18th century writer Ivan Krylov. The text uses it, and I just think it perfectly captures the essence of this whole dynamic.
The story of the lion and the fox, right?
That's the one. So picture a mighty lion right in the absolute prime of his life, and he's hunting in a valley. He's chasing a chamois like a mountain goat, and he has all but caught it. He is practically tasting his victory.
The goat is done for.
Right, but suddenly this deep, wide ravine appears right in front of them, completely barring the way.
Oh, man.
The chamois gathers all its strength and just shoots across the chasm, landing safely on the rocky cliff on the other side.
And what does the lion do? Because the lion is heavy.
Exactly. The lion wisely pulls up short. His physical instincts and his self-preservation kick in. He calculates the distance, realizes his own mass, and decides the jump is a biological impossibility.
So the lion is operating on pure rational logic at this exact moment. He knows his limits.
He does, but then a quote-unquote friend of the lion happens to scroll by.
And let me guess, that friend is the fox.
It is the fox. The fox looks at the lion, looks at the chasm, and says, "What, with your strength and agility, is it possible that you will yield to a feeble chamois?"
He's baiting him.
Totally. The fox says, "You have only to will it, and you will be able to work wonders. Though the abyss be deep, if you are only in earnest, I am certain you will clear it."
That is so manipulative.
It gets worse. He finishes by saying, "Surely you can confide in my disinterested friendship. I would not expose your life to danger if I were not so well aware of your strength and dexterity."
Wow. What's fascinating here is that the fox is playing such a brilliant, dangerous psychological game.
How so? What's the exact trap?
Well, notice the specific language he uses. The fox doesn't challenge the lion's courage directly, right?
Yeah.
He frames the impossible jump as a mere matter of will.
Right, if you just wanted it enough.
Exactly. He creates a scenario where the lion's failure to jump becomes a failure of his identity as the king of beasts.
And it works. The text says the lion's blood waxed hot and began to boil in his veins.
So logic goes out the window.
Completely. He flings himself with all his might into empty space. And, shocker, he cannot clear the chasm.
Because it's physically impossible.
Right. He tumbles headlong down the ravine and is killed instantly. And his dear friend the fox cautiously makes his way down to the bottom, pays his sad last rites to his dead friend, and over the next month picks his bones completely clean.
I mean, the absolute economy of effort on the fox's part is the crucial takeaway here.
They didn't even lift a paw.
No, because a fox could never defeat a lion in a physical confrontation. Attempting a direct assault on the lion's strength would just be absurd.
It would be suicide.
Yeah. So instead, the fox used the lion's own internal mechanism against him. He found the thumbscrew.
The lion's vanity.
Yes, his vanity, his pride, his desperate need to be seen as biologically superior. The fox just placed his thumb on that insecurity and applied a tiny amount of pressure, and the lion did all the heavy lifting of destroying himself.
He totally weaponized the ego, which, really leads us into the journey we're taking today.
The roadmap for the deep dive.
Exactly. First, we are going to explore how to spot these hidden tells in real life. Because let's be honest, most of us aren't lions standing at the edge of obvious cliffs.
Most interactions are way more subtle than that.
Right. Then we'll look at how the echoes of our childhood actually shape our adult vulnerabilities.
That part is always a little unsettling.
Oh, it gets deep. And from there, we'll examine some historical masterclasses in exploiting those weaknesses. We're talking ancient Roman battlefields, 17th century royal courts, and even the hotel lobbies of 1920s con artists.
And we definitely need to conclude by looking at the severe volatility of playing this game.
The dangers of the thumbscrew.
Right, because turning a thumbscrew is potent, but as the text warns, it is akin to playing with live explosives.
It can blow up in your face.
Easily. You are dealing with raw human emotion, which rarely behaves linearly.
So let's get into Section 1, the anatomy of a weakness. Because finding that loose stone in the real world seems incredibly difficult. People are guarded.
They are. The source text points out that we all live with this sort of perpetual armor around ourselves.
Right. We defend against change. We defend against intrusive people. We project confidence all day long.
Exactly. And if you just butt your head against someone's resistance, you waste all your energy attacking the thickest part of the wall.
So how do you get past it?
Well, the foundational premise of Law 33 is that human nature is fundamentally leaky.
Leaky. Like stuff spills out.
Yeah, no matter how meticulously constructed the armor is, there is always a gap. The text leans heavily on an observation by Sigmund Freud here.
Oh, what did Freud have to say about this?
Freud said, "No mortal can keep a secret. If his lips are silent, he chitters with his fingertips. Betrayal oozes out of him at every pore."
Betrayal oozes out of him. Wow, that is a really visceral way to describe human behavior.
It's gross, but it makes total sense when you think about it.
I guess so, yeah.
Freud is really highlighting the limits of our cognitive load. Conscious behavior, the things we choose to say, the resume we hand over, the carefully curated persona we have in a meeting.
Right, the stuff we control.
Yeah, that tells an observer almost nothing of strategic value. That is the armor.
Because it's all rehearsed?
Exactly. But the human brain simply does not possess the processing power to police every microexpression, every passing glance, every subconscious twitch 100% of the time.
The processing power required is just too high.
So the truth lives in the unconscious behavior, the seemingly unimportant gestures, the ooze, as Freud called it.
It ooze, I love that. And the text actually backs up Freud with the 19th century German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer.
Schopenhauer had some great insights on this.
He did. He argued that a man shows his true character precisely when he is off his guard, like in how he deals with trifles.
Trifles being the small, everyday, seemingly meaningless interactions.
Exactly. Schopenhauer's theory is that if a man is inconsiderate in small things, if he seeks only what is advantageous to himself in everyday affairs, you can be entirely sure that he would be a scoundrel on a massive scale.
If only the law didn't bind his hands, right?
Yes, that's exactly it.
And we see this constantly in modern advice. I mean, the classic waiter rule, judging a person's character based on how they treat service staff, is pure Schopenhauer.
Oh yeah, the waiter rule is a perfect example.
When the stakes are low, the cognitive guards are down. People don't think they're being evaluated on how they ask for a glass of water, so their baseline personality just bleeds through.
But, okay, let's unpack this. How do you actually get someone to lower their guard enough to show you those trifles?
It's a fair question.
Because if I know I am in a high-stakes environment, like a negotiation or a first date, I am hyper aware of my behavior. I'm not going to slip up and yell at a waiter.
Right, you're masking.
So the text offers a specific, highly deceptive technique to force the guard down, called the Talleyrand maneuver.
Named after the 19th century French diplomat.
Right. And Talleyrand's trick was this: to get someone to reveal a secret, you appear to open up to them first. You share a secret of your own.
But there's a catch, right?
A huge catch. Your secret is completely fabricated, or at least it is of absolutely no strategic importance to you.
But you deliver it as if it comes from the deepest part of your soul.
Exactly. My mind immediately went to cybersecurity when I read that.
Oh, like phishing.
Yes, it is the human equivalent of a phishing attack. You send an email that looks like it's from a trusted source, offering a tiny bit of vulnerability, all to get the target to voluntarily hand over their password.
You bypass the firewall by hacking the human.
Right. But I have to say, I struggle with the Talleyrand maneuver. I really push back on this when reading the source.
Why is that?
It sounds great on paper, but if someone walks up to me at a networking event and unprompted spills a massive dark secret, my first instinct isn't reciprocity.
It's not.
No, it is suspicion. I'm going to think they lack boundaries, not that they are trustworthy. Does this actually work on smart people?
Well, your skepticism is totally warranted if the maneuver is executed clumsily.
Okay, so it has to be smooth.
Very smooth. If a stranger just dumps trauma on you, the response is revulsion, obviously.
Yeah.
But Talleyrand was a master diplomat. His execution was incredibly subtle.
So how does a well-calibrated execution actually work on the brain? The psychology behind it is rooted in this deep evolutionary reflex of social reciprocity. When someone hands you a gift, even an emotional gift like a minor confidence, millennia of social conditioning demand that you give something back.
To maintain the social equilibrium?
Exactly. Furthermore, when you appear to be a sympathetic ear, you aren't challenging their intellect or their authority. You are essentially sitting down outside their gate and saying, hey, I have no weapons.
So it lowers the drawbridge.
It does.
Mm-hmm.
The target feels a sudden, almost subconscious neurological pressure to match your level of frankness.
So it is really about creating a vacuum that they feel compelled to fill.
Precisely that. The target experiences a momentary lapse in defensive posture because they misinterpret your strategic manipulation as a genuine human connection.
Wow, and they just hand over a real weakness in exchange for your fake one.
They do. Every time.
The text also emphasizes training our eyes for everyday clues beyond just running these traps, like watching how a person reacts to specific topics.
By looking for the indirect tells.
Do their eyes light up when someone mentions status? Do they get overly defensive when someone questions their autonomy?
You have to probe indirectly. The text advises that if you suspect someone has a desperate need to be loved, openly flatter them.
Even if the compliment is ridiculous?
Especially if it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Because if they lap it up, regardless of how absurd the flattery is, you have found the thumbscrew.
We actually see a pristine execution of this indirect probing in a seemingly tangential Hollywood anecdote from the source material.
Oh, the Irving Lazar story. I love this one.
It's wild. It perfectly illustrates how identifying an everyday vulnerability like physical vanity can completely neutralize traditional power structures.
Set the scene for us.
Okay, so this is quintessential Hollywood maneuvering. Irving Lazar was a legendary super agent, and he was trying to sell a play to Jack L. Warner.
Jack Warner, as in the head of Warner Brothers Studios.
Yes, the notoriously difficult, incredibly powerful Jack Warner. He was an absolute titan, a man whose professional armor was just incredibly thick.
The guy ate agents for breakfast.
Exactly. So Lazar tells a friend that he had a long, private meeting with Warner that day, but he didn't even bring the play up.
Which breaks every rule of standard negotiation.
Right. You secure an audience with the kingmaker, and you don't even make the pitch.
It makes no sense.
Well, Lazar explains his rationale. He is waiting until the following weekend when Warner travels down to Palm Springs.
Okay, a change of venue.
Right. Because Lazar has observed Warner's trifles. He knows that every single day in Palm Springs, Warner goes to the baths at the spa.
Blue ooze. He noticed the habit.
And here is where Lazar reveals his masterstroke. He tells his friend, and I'm paraphrasing here, there's a thing about Jack. He's 80 years old, he's very vain, and he doesn't like people to see him naked.
Wow. Lazar found the loose stone.
Oh, really did.
Because Jack Warner's power from behind a mahogany desk is absolute. But his physical vanity at age 80? That is a raw, unprotected nerve.
So Lazar's plan is to literally ambush Jack Warner in the buff at the spa.
Just walk right up to him naked.
Naked. Lazar reasons that if he walks up to Warner without any clothes on and starts pitching the play, Warner will be so intensely embarrassed and focused on his physical vulnerability that his only goal will be to make the interaction stop.
And what's the fastest way to make Lazar go away?
To say yes. Because if he says no, Lazar's just going to stand there naked, continuing to pitch this play.
That is hilarious.
Yeah.
He is willing to weaponize his own shamelessness to exploit Warner's shame.
And it worked. 2 weeks later, Warner Brothers buys the property. Lazar executes the pitch, exactly as planned, right there in the baths.
It is a funny visual, but I mean, the underlying psychology is ruthless.
It is.
Lazar bypassed the intellect entirely. He didn't try to out-argue Jack Warner on the commercial viability of the script or the brilliance of the dialogue.
He didn't even try to play the business game.
No, he applied immense pressure to a completely unrelated, emotional, thumbscrew, physical embarrassment. The cognitive load of managing that embarrassment overwhelmed Warner's ability to negotiate.
So to relieve the emotional pressure, the target just concedes the intellectual point.
Exactly.
Well, knowing how to spot the ooze is one thing, but the text pushes deeper into the origins of these weaknesses. Because where do these vulnerabilities actually come from in the first place?
Right, the root cause.
The source material argues that to understand the adult, we have to find the helpless child.
And this is a really profound psychological insight within the text. The most glaring weaknesses, the ones that dictate completely irrational adult behavior, are almost always forged in childhood.
Before we have any armor.
Yes. They are formed long before the individual have the cognitive architecture to build compensatory defenses. And the text categorizes these childhood roots into two broad camps.
What are they?
Either the child was heavily pampered and indulged in a specific area, or a deep emotional need went entirely unfulfilled.
Like a severe lack of parental affection.
Right. Or constantly feeling overshadowed by a sibling. And as that child matures into an adult, that specific indulgence or that gaping deficiency gets buried under layers of professional etiquette, education, and societal norms.
So it looks like it has disappeared.
It looks gone, but it is always there. It's just humming in the background, waiting to be triggered. Recognizing that unresolved childhood state gives you a master key to their psyche.
The text actually provides a very clear behavioral tell for this, too.
The reversion, right?
Exactly. It notes that when you touch upon this specific childhood nerve, the person will often suddenly act like a child.
Their adult facade just dissolves.
Yeah. They revert to emotional responses they should have outgrown decades ago. Pouting, sudden tantrums, irrational stubbornness.
So what's the strategic advice here?
The text offers advice that is almost mathematical. It says, if your target went without something vital when they were young, you supply it. Or at least you supply the illusion of it.
And if they were indulged?
If they reveal a hidden indulgence from their youth, you indulge it. The text claims that in either case, the target will be entirely unable to resist you.
Because you are communicating directly with a part of their brain that predates their logic.
You bypass the guards by comforting the inner child.
Exactly. The adult intellect is essentially put to sleep while the child takes the steering wheel.
Man, that's wild. And this moves us into another layer of psychological profiling that the text introduces the rule of contrasts or the rule of opposites.
This one upends everything.
I find this fascinating because it completely flips how we usually interpret human behavior. The premise is that an overt, highly visible personality trait often conceals its exact opposite.
We're talking about the psychological defense mechanism known as reaction formation.
Reaction formation. What does that mean practically?
Well, when an individual harbors a deep insecurity or an unacceptable desire, they don't just act neutral to hide it. The anxiety is so high that they swing the behavioral pendulum as far to the opposite extreme as possible.
It's massive overcompensation.
Exactly.
The examples the text lists are universally recognizable. Like, it argues that people who aggressively thump their chests and posture are often, deep down, profound cowards.
Right.
A fiercely prudish exterior often hides a deeply lascivious soul. The people who are incredibly uptight, rigid, and obsessed with order are secretly screaming for chaos and adventure.
And the intensely shy are often secretly desperate for attention.
It's all backwards.
It is. And if we extrapolate this rule of opposites to grand historical strategy, recognizing this dynamic can literally change the course of empires.
You're talking about the Roman story.
Yes. The text provides a breathtaking historical case study of this exact psychological dynamic dictating the outcome of a massive military conflict.
The Battle of Pharsalia. We are talking about Julius Caesar versus Pompey the Great in the Roman Civil War.
The stakes could not be higher.
No, the winner literally controls the known world. And the text relies on the ancient historian Plutarch to paint the picture here.
What was the tactical situation?
Well, Pompey holds a massive numerical advantage. His infantry outnumbers Caesar's 45,000 to 22,000.
2 to 1.
Right. But the real existential threat to Caesar is Pompey's cavalry. They outnumber Caesar's cavalry 5 to 1. 7,000 against 1,000.
That's devastating. And Plutarch includes a very specific, almost peculiar observation about Pompey's cavalry, doesn't he?
He does. He describes them as splendidly armed and bravely mounted, and valuing themselves upon the fine horses they kept and upon their own handsome persons.
Their own handsome persons. That phrase is the ultimate tell.
It really is. These aren't grizzled, scarred veterans. These are young, elite, immensely wealthy Roman aristocrats.
They are in the flower of their youth.
Yes, they wear their hair long, they are beautiful, and they are acutely aware of it. They are riding onto the battlefield, overflowing with confidence, chest-thumping bravado, and martial arrogance.
To a standard observer, they look like the terrifying apex of military might.
But Caesar was an unparalleled reader of human nature. He looked across the battlefield at that overt bravado, that spectacular display of martial vanity, and he applied the rule of opposites.
He saw right through the chest thumping.
He realized their bravado was not born of battle-hardened courage. It was a performance. It was the posturing of young men who hadn't actually experienced the horrific, muddy, disfiguring reality of close-quarters combat.
So what was their thumbscrew?
Caesar deduced that their thumbscrew was their vanity. Their deepest unspoken fear wasn't losing the battle conceptually, it was losing their physical beauty.
It was the terror of a permanent, disfiguring blemish.
Exactly, a scar that would ruin their social standing back in Rome. So Caesar gives his outnumbered men an order that shatters all standard doctrines of Roman warfare.
Because the typical tactic is to throw javelins from a distance.
Right, to break enemy ranks. Or in close combat, you strike at the legs or torso to disable the opponent. But Caesar forbids this.
What does he tell them to do?
He orders his cohorts to hold their javelins as spears and thrust them directly, point blank, at the faces of Pompey's beautiful cavalry.
Wow. It's a brilliantly cruel psychological tactic.
Mm.
He ignores the armor on their bodies and aims directly for the psychological weakness in their minds.
And Plutarch's description of the clash is just incredible. When Caesar's veteran infantrymen rush forward and start jabbing sharp iron directly at the faces of these splendid young gentlemen, the elite cavalry absolutely panics.
They just break.
They are so paralyzed by the fear of being struck in the face, of being scarred for life, that they cannot even endure the sight of the weapons. They literally turn about and cover their faces with their hands to protect their looks.
That is insane. In the middle of a battle.
In the middle of the most important battle in the world, they break formation, turn their horses, and flee the battlefield in complete, shameful disorder.
And that exposes Pompey's infantry.
Yep. Because the cavalry breaks, they expose the flank. Caesar's forces just roll them up and butcher them.
The collapse of the cavalry ruined Pompey's entire army. Plutarch notes that Pompey himself was so psychologically shattered by the sudden, inexplicable flight of his elite forces that he lost his senses.
You could skate up.
He retreated to his tent without speaking a word and simply sat there while his empire dissolved around him. Caesar won control of the Roman world not through superior numbers or even superior terrain, but by identifying the hidden thumbscrew of vanity operating beneath the armor of elite warriors.
The physical reality of a massive battle was dictated entirely by a psychological read.
It's astounding.
It really is. But, the text pivots to a different manifestation of weakness in the next section. What happens when the thumbscrew isn't an internal psychological trait like vanity or childhood trauma, but is instead an external factor?
But a structural weakness.
Right. What if the loose stone in the castle wall is actually another person?
This introduces the concept of the weak link. It is a vital structural understanding for anyone navigating complex hierarchies.
Like a royal court or a modern corporate boardroom.
Or a political administration, yeah. The core idea is that the individual who sits superficially on top of the organizational chart, the king, the CEO, the president, is very rarely the one holding the true, unadulterated power.
There's always someone behind the curtain.
Almost always. A person behind the scenes who exerts a tremendous, disproportionate influence over that leader.
Like the favorite or the spouse or the trusted chief of staff.
Exactly. The text argues that these behind-the-scenes power brokers are the structural weak links.
So if you want to move the king, a direct assault on the king's intellect is foolish.
You win the favor of the weak link, and you let them move the king for you.
To illustrate this architecture of power, the text provides this sprawling historical narrative detailing the rise of one of the most cunning political operators in European history, Cardinal Richelieu of France.
Ah, Richelieu. The 17th century French court was a labyrinth of shifting alliances, betrayals, and massive egos.
It was a mess.
And Richelieu approached this environment with the cold precision of a structural engineer. He didn't just grasp for power blindly. He mapped the network to find the load-bearing beams.
So let's look at how he did it. The year is 1615. Richelieu is a 30-year-old bishop. He is young, ambitious, but not yet a major player.
Okay.
He has been given an immense, highly visible responsibility to deliver a speech before the representatives of the three estates of France. He is the mouthpiece for the clergy.
That cakes.
Very. He delivers a long, standard speech hitting all the expected ecclesiastical talking points, but at the very end, he executes an incredibly calculated maneuver.
He turns his full attention away from the audience and toward the throne.
Right. Now, sitting on the throne is the actual King of France, Louis XIII. But Louis is only 15 years old. Sitting beside him is his mother, the Queen Mother, Marie de Medicis, who has been acting as the regent.
And protocol, tradition, and basic political survival dictate that Richelieu should deliver flowery, deferential praise to the young king.
Because he is the sovereign.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Richelieu doesn't do that. He looks directly at, and solely at, the Queen Mother.
He just ignores the king.
Pretty much. He concludes his speech with a long, incredibly fulsome, almost sycophantic praise of Marie. He lays the flattery on so thick that it actually offends some of the more conservative senior church members in the room.
But how does Marie react?
Marie de Medicis. She is sitting there, radiating pleasure. The text notes the smile on her face was unforgettable.
Which naturally invites the question of risk assessment. Openly ignoring the anointed king in front of the entire political apparatus of France seems like a fast track to exile, or worse.
It does seem crazy.
I read that and thought, you are publicly declaring the king irrelevant. How is that not career suicide?
Well, to a conventional thinker, it absolutely is. But Richelieu's move was based on a flawless psychological and structural diagnosis.
What did he see that others didn't?
Richelieu realized that Marie de Medicis was the keystone of the current power structure. On paper, she wasn't weak, she was governing France. But Richelieu looked past her title and saw her internal thumbscrew.
Which was?
She was a deeply insecure woman who required constant, obsessive validation and masculine attention to feel secure in her power.
Wow. And what about the young king?
Furthermore, Richelieu understood the psychological dynamic of young King Louis. He knew Louis loved his mother, but crucially, he recognized that Louis was fundamentally stunted. He would always remain a child in relation to her.
So Richelieu calculates the board. Gaining the favor of a 15-year-old boy is a volatile investment. A teenager's favor can shift instantly.
Exactly. But the king's emotional dependence on his mother, that is a permanent structural reality.
So Richelieu targets the mother.
He targets the weak link.
And the return on investment is immediate. A year later, Marie appoints him Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs. He has breached the inner circle.
And what is his very next move?
He maps the network again and finds the next weak link. Marie has a favorite, an Italian named Concino Concini, who also happens to be her lover.
Concini is described as vain, arrogant, and foppish. He is essentially the 17th century French equivalent of Pompey's beautiful Roman cavalry.
So Richelieu adapts his strategy. He plays directly to Concini's vanity. He defers to this foppish lover as if Concini were the monarch himself.
Flawless execution.
Within months, Richelieu is firmly established as one of Concini's closest favorites. He has completely embedded himself in the power structure of the Queen Mother and her lover. He's perfectly positioned.
But then the unpredictable happens.
Right. In 1617, the young King Louis, who everyone dismissed as a passive child, suddenly orchestrates a violent palace coup.
He just snaps.
He flexes his royal muscle, has Concini assassinated right in the courtyard, arrests his mother's advisors, and effectively exiles his own mother, locking her in a chateau. Louis violently seizes command of France.
The entire power structure Richelieu attached himself to just collapsed.
Overnight.
He was the protege of the murdered lover and the imprisoned mother. By all conventional logic of court politics, Richelieu should be fleeing the country or heading to the executioner's block.
But Richelieu is playing a timeline that extends far beyond the immediate crisis. While the rest of the court scurries away from Marie de Medicis to curry favor with the victorious young king, Richelieu stands by her.
Why that? That seems so dangerous.
Because he calculates that Louis, despite this violent adolescent outburst of independence, is still psychologically tethered to his mother.
Oh, that's brilliant.
And because Richelieu is the only competent, intelligent operator left who is trusted by the isolated Queen Mother, he positions himself as the indispensable liaison, the sole conduit between Marie and the king.
He survives the coup by becoming the bridge.
He turns a disaster into leverage. Over the next few years, Marie uses all her remaining influence in Rome to get Richelieu elevated to the rank of cardinal.
He essentially used the Queen Mother as a blast shield during the coup, and then repurposed her as a ladder to climb to international prominence.
And then comes the final, masterful turn of the screw. By 1623, King Louis is struggling. He is chronologically older, but he is still emotionally childish.
He can't handle the job.
Exactly. He finds the actual grinding work of governing the endless affairs of state, the decisions to be completely overwhelming. He is crippled by indecision and anxiety.
So Marie steps in.
Marie repeatedly whispers in his ear that Richelieu is the only man possessing the intellect to save him. Louis harbors a deep personal dislike for Richelieu, but his own weakness, his inability to bear the weight of the crown, forces him to yield.
He makes Richelieu his chief counselor and eventually prime minister.
And the moment Richelieu secures the prime ministership, the moment he holds the reins of the state, he instantly and brutally discards Marie de Medici.
Just drops her.
He stops visiting her, he openly contradicts her, he eventually orchestrates her permanent exile. She was a stepping stone, and he has reached the summit.
But now Richelieu faces a new structural problem. How does he control the king directly, without a proxy?
Right, because Marie is gone.
This is where Richelieu's genius elevates him to a historical icon. Previous ministers had tried to manage Louis by minimizing his stress. They tried to keep him out of trouble, sheltering him from complex problems because they knew he was emotionally fragile.
Make things easy for him.
Right. But Richelieu employs the exact opposite strategy. He plays directly on the king's deepest thumbscrew, his overwhelming feelings of inadequacy and helplessness. Richelieu deliberately manufactures chaos.
He pushes the king into massive, highly ambitious, and incredibly dangerous projects.
The text highlights a massive domestic crusade against the Huguenots and an extended, brutal, multi-front war with Spain.
Richelieu intentionally sets the geopolitical landscape on fire. Why?
Because the sheer immensity of these crises completely paralyzes the king's fragile mind. The bolder the venture, the more terrifying the consequences, and the more helpless Louis feels.
And the more helpless he feels,
The more entirely dependent he becomes on the only man who possesses the iron will and intellect to manage the chaos, Cardinal Richelieu. Richelieu engineers insurmountable problems so that he can cast himself as the indispensable savior. For the next 18 years, Richelieu governs France entirely according to his own strategic vision, utilizing the king's psychological fragility as the engine of his absolute power.
It is breathtakingly cynical. But the structural brilliance is undeniable. He found the weak link in the social network to get close to power, and then he found the weak link in the king's own psychology to wield that power.
What Richelieu was ultimately exploiting in King Louis is a psychological state that the source text identifies as perhaps the most potent and reliable thumbscrew of all the void.
The void.
Specifically, the emotional voids of insecurity, inadequacy, and chronic unhappiness. The text explicitly posits that successfully filling an emotional void is an indefinitely prolongable source of power.
Let's transition into the mechanics of the void then, because the text argues that the insecure and the chronically unhappy are the individuals least capable of disguising their weaknesses.
They project it everywhere.
Right. The insecure are absolute sponges for social validation. If you can provide that validation, you effectively own their loyalty.
And the text provides a masterclass in this.
Yeah.
Shifting the timeline from 17th century France to the roaring 1920s in America, featuring one of the most audacious con men in history, Count Victor Lustig.
Lustig is such a fascinating psychological study. He wasn't a crude pickpocket. He didn't steal money by force.
No. He expertly diagnosed and manipulated emotional voids so perfectly that his victims willingly, eagerly handed their fortunes over to him.
Okay, so the narrative takes place in December of 1925.
at the most exclusive, swanky hotel in Palm Beach, Florida.
Picture the lobby.
Right. The old money elites are lounging around observing everyone. Suddenly, this mysterious, impeccably dressed man arrives. He pulls up in a Rolls-Royce driven by a uniformed Japanese chauffeur.
He's making an entrance.
Big time. He walks with a subtle, elegant cane. He is constantly receiving urgent telegrams at all hours, projecting an aura of immense international importance.
But he doesn't talk much.
No, he only engages in the briefest, most polite conversations. The hotel rumor mill immediately starts churning word spreads that he is a count from one of the wealthiest, most reclusive aristocratic families in Europe.
He is baiting the hook by establishing an aura of extreme exclusivity and unapproachable status. He becomes the most desirable social connection in the room, precisely because he seems uninterested in connecting.
The entire hotel is obsessed with him. But Lustig entirely ignores the truly wealthy, established socialites. Instead, he zeroes in on one specific target, a man named Herman Lawler, the head of a mid-sized engineering company.
Who is Herman Lawler?
Lawler is newly rich. He has recently acquired his fortune, and he is absolutely desperate to forge social connections with the elite.
Which brings us back to our earlier discussion on the anatomy of a weakness. How did Lustig, swimming in a hotel full of wealthy people, identify Lawler as the perfect mark?
Lustig was looking for the ooze. He observed the trifles.
What did he see?
He noticed that Lawler consistently overtipped the waiters, a classic behavioral tell of someone suffering from imposter syndrome, trying to purchase the respect they don't feel they naturally command.
Ah, Schopenhauer's waiter rule again.
Exactly. He noticed Lawler seemed overly deferential and nervous when speaking to the hotel concierge. He noticed Lawler talked a little too loudly about his business successes in the lobby, desperately trying to prove he belonged.
So Lustig's diagnosis was instantaneous. This man has new money, he is chronically insecure, and he possesses a massive gaping void where his social validation should be.
So Lustig's approach is brilliant in its restraint. He doesn't pitch a scam. He doesn't ask for money. He simply walks up and offers his friendship.
To an intensely insecure man like Lawler, being selectively chosen by the mysterious European count is an immediate, intoxicating hit of social validation.
It elevates him above the old money snobs who are ignoring him.
Exactly. So they become fast friends.
And Lawler, eager to impress his aristocratic companion, does most of the talking. One evening, the conversation turns intimate, and Lawler confesses a deep anxiety his business is actually struggling, and he foresees serious financial trouble ahead.
Lustig seizes the opening and executes the Talleyrand maneuver perfectly.
The fake secret.
Right. He lowers his voice and confides that he, the great count, also has severe money problems. He weaves this tragic tale about how communists seized his ancestral estates in Europe, and he is too old and aristocratic to learn a common trade.
The hook is set.
But, he whispers, he found a desperate solution. A money-making machine.
I want to pause here to highlight the absurdity of this scam because it perfectly illustrates the power of the thumbscrew. If Lustig had approached Lawler on day one in the hotel lobby and offered to sell him a magical money box, Lawler, the rational businessman, would have laughed him out of the room.
Exactly. I mean, building on that, Lawler's initial reaction is actually shock. He whispers, "You counterfeit."
And Lustig plays the offended aristocrat perfectly. He says, no, it's not counterfeiting. It's a highly classified chemical duplication process.
You insert a genuine dollar bill, wait 6 hours for the chemicals to process, and you extract 2 perfect, indistinguishable bills.
He spins a labyrinthine spy novel backstory about how the technology was developed by German intelligence to undermine the British economy and smuggled out of Europe.
And Lawler buys it.
Lawler, his rational mind entirely overridden by his emotional connection to the Count, demands a demonstration. They go to Lustig's room, and Lustig produces this magnificent complex mahogany box covered in brass cranks, dials, and slots.
It looks apart.
He inserts a dollar bill, they wait until the next morning, and Lustig pulls out 2 bills, still damp from the quote-unquote chemicals. Lawler takes the replicated bill to a bank, and the bank accepts it as genuine.
Because it is genuine. Lustig simply hid 2 real dollar bills inside the mahogany box beforehand. It is a parlor trick. It is a child's magic trick.
But Lawler's intellect is completely offline. He is hooked. He feverishly begs Lustig to sell him the machine. Lustig plays hard to get, claiming it is the only one in existence, feigning reluctance to part with his only lifeline.
The reluctance only drives Lawler's desperation higher.
Finally, Lawler offers a staggering sum, $25,000. Adjusted for inflation, that is well over $400,000 today. for a wooden box with some gears.
And Lustig accepts.
Reluctantly, he makes Lawler swear a blood oath of secrecy and immediately checks out of the hotel, disappearing into the wind.
It's brutal.
The tragic punchline is that it takes Lawler a full year of futilely cranking out blank paper before the crushing shame of his own gullibility wears off enough for him to report the crime to the police.
If we deconstruct the psychology of this transaction, Lawler wasn't paying $25,000 for a mahogany box. He was purchasing relief from his psychic void.
He was buying status.
Lustig offered him respect from the other hotel guests, entry into the glittering mythical world of old European wealth, and a magical, effortless solution to his deep-seated financial anxieties. The illusion of validation was so powerful, it completely short-circuited his business acumen.
As the text eloquently summarizes, their neediness is the groove in which you place your thumbnail and turn them at will.
The text also offers a brilliant, brief sidebar story about another legendary con man from the same era, the Yellow Kid Weil.
Oh, this story perfectly bridges the concept of validation we just discussed with the weak link strategy Richelieu used.
How does Weil pull it off?
Weil is attempting to run a massive, elaborate fake mining stock and street railway scam on the president of a large bank in Omaha. The scam requires the banker to invest $350,000.
A massive sum.
Weil puts in the work. He plays golf with the banker, he visits his home, he builds the professional relationship. But the banker is a shrewd, battle-tested financial operator. He hesitates. He won't sign the check.
The direct assault on the castle wall is failing. The banker's professional armor is simply too thick to penetrate with a standard pitch.
Weil realizes he needs a new angle. He looks for the weak link. He attends a dinner at the banker's home, and he purposefully wears a dash of a specific perfume, Cody's April Violets.
Which, the text notes, wasn't considered particularly effeminate for a wealthy man at the time.
Right. And the banker's wife smells the fragrance, and she is enchanted. She asks Weil where he acquired it. Weil smoothly lies and says it is an incredibly rare, bespoke blend, specially formulated for him by a master French perfumer.
Setting the trap.
The very next day, Weil goes out into Omaha, buys 10 ounces of standard, off-the-shelf Cody's April Violets from a local department store, and pours it into 2 beautifully ornate antique French bottles he happened to have in his luggage.
He dresses it up.
He wraps them exquisitely and presents them as a gift to the wife, claiming he had them specially imported from Cologne just for her.
He is bypassing the husband's financial skepticism by validating the wife's desire for exclusivity and European sophistication.
She is absolutely enraptured. She considers it the most exotic, divine fragrance she has ever encountered. And crucially, she tells her husband, the banker, "I was fortunate to be associated with a man like you," meaning Weil.
So she becomes Weil's advocate inside the castle.
She lobbies her husband on Weil's behalf, and the very next day, the shrewd banker parts with the $350,000. Why? Weil later wrote, for he had complete faith in his wife's judgment.
Weil realized he couldn't con the banker's intellect, so he conned the wife's vanity and let the wife's influence con the husband.
It is a masterful pivot, and it echoes another historical narrative the text provides regarding the immense power of validating someone's taste and intelligence.
Right. This example doesn't involve a con man in the criminal sense, but rather a legendary, highly successful art dealer, Joseph Devine.
Joseph Devine and Arabella Huntington. This is a fascinating sociological study of high society dynamics.
Tell us about Arabella.
Arabella Huntington was the wife of Cullis P. Huntington, who was a spectacularly wealthy, late 19th century American railroad magnate. But Arabella came from very humble, working-class origins.
So she wasn't old money.
No. When she threw lavish parties at her massive San Francisco mansion, the established social elite flatly refused to attend. They viewed her as a gold digger, an uncultured upstart. The old money looked down on her.
That it had to hurt.
It did. And because she controlled immense wealth, art dealers constantly courted her, but they did it with thinly veiled condescension. They treated her like a walking bank account who knew absolutely nothing about fine art.
Which, frankly, she probably didn't at the time.
Yeah.
But condescension is the fastest way to trigger someone's defensive armor. If you make someone feel ignorant, they will close their purse.
Right. Devine, however, took a radically different approach. He diagnosed her thumbscrew within minutes of meeting her.
He recognized that her void was a desperate, agonizing need to feel important, cultured, and at home in high society. She suffered from massive imposter syndrome regarding her lower-class background.
So, for the first few years of their relationship, Duveen doesn't try to sell her a single painting.
He abandons the transactional approach entirely.
Instead, he positions himself as her trusted escort and confidant. He takes her shopping at the finest stores. He chats with her endlessly about the queens, princes, and aristocrats he knows in Europe. He treats her not just as an equal, but as a superior, refined figure in high society.
He is pouring water into the void. He is providing the intense social validation and respect that the San Francisco elites actively denied her.
And while he is acting as her aristocratic escort, he is subtly, indirectly educating her on his own personal aesthetic philosophy, which, conveniently for him, dictated that the best art in the world is always the most expensive art.
Of course it did.
He never lectures her or corrects her. He just lets her organically absorb his views. And once she starts parroting his philosophy back to him, he begins to act as if she had always possessed this exquisite, inherently refined taste. He validates her intellect.
The text explicitly notes that her aesthetic sensibilities before meeting Duveen were abysmal. But by treating her as a latent art genius, he locks her into a brilliant psychological trap.
How so?
If she buys from him, she isn't just buying a painting. She is purchasing confirmation of the flattering, cultured image he reflects back at her.
And the long-term investment pays off astronomically. When her husband dies in 1900, Arabella inherits the full, staggering fortune. Suddenly, she begins purchasing incredibly expensive masterworks, Rembrandts, Velázquez's, and she buys them exclusively from Duveen.
He became her only dealer.
He eventually sells her Thomas Gainsborough's famous painting, The Blue Boy, for what was at the time the highest price ever paid for a single work of art.
Incredible.
The text draws a very powerful universal conclusion from this dynamic. Making people feel better about their tastes, their social standing, or their intelligence is a trap they will gladly, joyfully stay in forever.
They may not even care if they quietly suspect you are manipulating them because the emotional warmth of the validation is worth any financial price to them.
It creates an unbreakable positive reinforcement loop. But the text does not stop at positive reinforcement or the filling of empty voids.
No, it gets much darker.
It pushes the analysis into significantly darker, more volatile territory. What happens when the thumbscrew isn't a lack of something, but an overwhelming, uncontrollable presence of something?
We are moving from the manipulation of insecurity to the exploitation of raw passions, lusts, and deep-seated fears.
The premise here is that people operating in the grip of powerful, primal emotions, whether it is a paranoid terror or a base motive like lust or intense vanity, literally lose their executive function. They cannot control themselves.
And the text argues that if a target cannot control themselves, you can step in and do the controlling for them.
To illustrate the mechanics of this, we travel back to 16th century France, examining the strategies of Queen Regent Catherine de' Medicis.
Catherine is undeniably one of the most formidable, ruthlessly pragmatic political figures of the Renaissance, and her acute understanding of male psychology was forged in the deep humiliation of her own marriage.
The text sets the scene in 1559. Catherine's husband, King Henri II, dies suddenly in a freak jousting accident. Her eldest son ascends to the throne but dies barely a year later.
So Catherine is forced to step up and take control of the country as regent for her next son, Charles IX, who is only 10 years old.
But her position is incredibly fragile. She is Italian, viewed as a foreigner by the court, and she's surrounded by powerful, deeply ambitious French noblemen who believe they have a greater claim to rule than she does.
Who were the main threats?
The primary existential threats to her power are Antoine de Bourbon, the King of Navarre, and his brother, the militarily powerful Prince of Condé.
Catherine needs to neutralize these men to survive. But she doesn't control the military apparatus tightly enough to simply arrest or crush them by force. She is forced to rely entirely on psychological warfare.
And she deploys a weapon that became legendary in European history, the escadron volant, or the flying squadron.
What was the flying squadron?
This was a hand-picked group of her loveliest, most alluring, and highly intelligent maids of honor. Catherine observes her enemies and knows that Antoine de Bourbon has a notorious, uncontrollable weakness for young women, is a passion he cannot moderate.
So she assigns one of her most attractive operatives, a woman named Louise de Rouet, to cross his path and essentially seduce him.
Antoine falls into the trap completely, and suddenly his new intimate lover is reporting his every movement, every political thought, every secret alliance back to Catherine.
The intelligence-gathering operation works so flawlessly that she assigns another maid to neutralize the Prince of Condé.
If we pause to dissect why this worked so consistently on highly educated, powerful men, the text provides a brilliant psychological analysis.
It wasn't just basic biological lust. It was about power, ego, and overcompensation.
How did Catherine figure that out?
Catherine had spent years watching her own husband, King Henri II, fall completely, helplessly under the spell of his legendary mistress, Diane de Poitiers.
And what did she learn from that?
What Catherine learned from observing her husband's infidelity was a paradoxical truth about highly powerful men, particularly men who inherit their status rather than earning it through merit, harbor a desperate, unspoken need to feel that they can conquer a woman purely on their own masculine merits, without relying on the leverage of their royal titles or wealth.
The illusion of conquest. The text explicitly says that as long as the woman begins the affair by acting as if she has been overwhelmed and conquered by his sheer magnetism, the man is rendered completely blind to the fact that, as time passes, the power dynamic entirely flips.
The mistress, having secured his emotional dependence, comes to hold total power over him.
That is the core mechanism. This desperate need to be the conqueror actually reveals a tremendous hidden helplessness. Passionate, lustful men often posture as strong, dominating figures, but the text argues they're simply filling the stage with theatricality to mask their lack of self-control.
Their intense desire is an emotion they cannot conceal and therefore cannot govern.
Catherine recognized this and turned this male vulnerability into a state institution. She unleashed her flying squadron on the most dangerous men in France, knowing with absolute certainty that their biological need to conquer would inevitably make them the conquered.
The ruthlessness of her application is wild. She even deployed this tactic against her own son-in-law.
Oh, the story with Marguerite and Henri?
Yes, she married her daughter Marguerite to Henri, the son of Antoine de Bourbon. To ensure Henri's political loyalty, she unleashes the most alluring member of the squadron, the Baroness of Sauves, on him.
Her own daughter's husband.
Marguerite actually recorded in her memoirs that the Baroness so completely ensnared her husband that Henri and Marguerite stopped sleeping together or even speaking. The Baroness became Henri's de facto handler for Catherine.
And didn't she use the Baroness on someone else too?
Yes. When Catherine's youngest son, the Duke of Alençon, started forming a dangerous political alliance with Henri, Catherine simply assigned the Baroness to seduce him as well.
So they were both fighting over the same woman.
Exactly. The two men ended up bitterly fighting over the Baroness. Their political friendship was destroyed, and any threat of them conspiring against Catherine evaporated.
She weaponized their uncontrollable passions to systematically dismantle their political alliances from the inside out. It is a masterclass in exploiting the void of self-control.
But lust isn't the only uncontrollable emotion explored in this section. The text also delves into fear, specifically paranoid fear, and deep-seated timidity, and how it can be manipulated to control a superior.
For this, we look at a story about Otto von Bismarck, the legendary Iron Chancellor, and how he managed the King of Prussia.
This narrative serves as a textbook example of using the rule of contrast we discussed earlier to manage a superior's uncontrollable anxiety.
The year is 1862. King William of Prussia appoints Bismarck as his premier and minister for foreign affairs. Bismarck's reputation precedes him. He is known throughout Europe for being bold, aggressive, and fiercely ambitious, especially regarding military expansion.
But King William is in a very precarious position. He is surrounded by liberal politicians in the parliament who want to severely limit his monarchical power, and his wife, Queen Augusta, absolutely despises Bismarck.
She lobbies hard to stop the appointment, but the king, feeling he needs a strong hand, sticks to his decision.
But almost immediately, Bismarck commits a massive, potentially fatal political blunder.
A catastrophic blunder. Barely a week into the job, Bismarck gives an impromptu speech to some ministers, attempting to convince them to enlarge the army. In a moment of rhetorical excess, he ends the speech with a line that would become instantly infamous.
The iron and blood speech.
Right. He says the great questions of the time will be decided, not by speeches and resolutions of majorities, but by iron and blood.
Word of the iron and blood speech leaks instantly.
The press goes wild. The Queen is screaming at the king that Bismarck is a barbaric, warmongering militarist trying to usurp the throne. The liberal parliament is in an uproar.
And King William absolutely panics. He is gripped by uncontrollable terror.
He genuinely believes that if he keeps Bismarck in power, it will spark a revolution, and he will end up on a scaffold having his head chopped off, exactly like Louis XVI in the French Revolution.
So he decides he has to fire Bismarck immediately to save his own life.
Bismarck has essentially backed himself into an impossible corner. His aggressive posturing has triggered the king's deepest existential fears. The king is operating on pure panic.
So Bismarck knows he has to intercept the king before the firing becomes official, and he knows he screwed up. I think the natural instinct for anyone in that position, facing a furious and terrified boss, is to grovel.
To apologize, walk back the comments, claim he was misquoted, and promise to behave.
But as Bismarck formulates his strategy, he rejects the apology. He realizes an apology would validate the king's fear that a mistake was made. Instead, Bismarck chooses to do the exact opposite. He goes on the offensive.
Because Bismarck, having observed the king closely, knows the king's thumbscrew.
Bismarck understands the complex layers of King William's psychology. On the surface, in this moment, the king is acting timid, weak, and terrified of his wife and the parliament.
But Bismarck knows William has a deep, lifelong military background. He knows the king harbors a profound underlying sense of martial honor and, crucially, a secret, burning shame about how easily he lets his wife and the liberal politicians bully him.
The king secretly yearns to be a great, mighty, chest-thumping monarch, a conqueror, but he is biologically too timid to express it. His overt timidity conceals a desperate, buried need to show courage.
So Bismarck intercepts the king. The king is in a total tizzy, literally talking about the guillotine, saying, "I can see perfectly well where all this will end. Over there, in front of the opera house, under my windows, they will cut off your head and mine a little while afterwards."
Bismarck looks at this terrified monarch and completely reframes the situation. He basically says, yes, then we shall be dead. We must die sooner or later, and could there be a more respectable way of dying?
He tells him, "I should die fighting for the cause of my king and master, and your majesty would die sealing with your own blood your royal rights granted by God's grace."
It is an unbelievably audacious pivot. Bismarck takes the king's pathetic fear of execution and frames it not as a political failure, but as a glorious martial martyrdom. He bypasses the political reality of the speech and appeals directly to the king's suppressed military honor.
He essentially challenges the king's manhood.
Bismarck looks him in the eye and asks, isn't the honor of Germany more important than quibbling over words?
He plays the king perfectly. He steps into the void. Bismarck becomes the brave, Napoleonic figure of absolute certainty that the king secretly wishes he could be.
And the psychological manipulation works flawlessly. Not only does Bismarck convince the king to stand his ground against the queen and the parliament, he actually gets the king to agree to the massive military buildup, which was Bismarck's goal all along.
Bismarck recognized the psychological truth that timid souls often yearn intensely to be their opposites. They yearn to be Napoleons, to be decisive and aggressive, but they lack the internal fortitude to initiate the action.
Bismarck offered to be the king's surrogate spine. He pushed the king into incredibly bold, historically massive actions, eventually orchestrating 3 separate wars and the unification of the entire German Empire, and in doing so, made the king entirely dependent on him.
Because when a timid person is pushed to take a bold step, they are terrified of the consequences, and they need someone strong to hold their hand and manage the fallout.
Which provides the perfect transition into the final section of our analysis today. Because pushing a timid, easily panicked king into 3 major European wars sounds like a scenario that could very easily spiral out of control.
And that brings us to the concept of the reversal. The source text is very explicit that deploying these tactics, playing with these thumbscrews, comes with a massive, glaring warning label regarding the volatility of human emotion.
The text issues a very direct warning. You may stir up an action you cannot control. This is the inherent structural danger of Law 33.
Playing with fire.
Exactly. When you manipulate individuals based on rational logic, financial interest, or political expediency, you can generally predict the outcome. It's a mathematical game. You understand their incentives.
But when you bypass reason and put your thumb directly on someone's deepest emotional wounds, their unresolved childhood traumas, their intense, fragile vanities, their uncontrollable paranoid fears, you are playing with fire.
You cannot perfectly calculate the blast radius of a human emotion.
The text gives specific examples of how this psychological warfare backfires on the manipulator. If you push a timid person into bold action, like Bismarck did with the king, there is always the very real risk they might snap.
The sudden rush of power might push them completely over the edge into megalomania, and they might drag you down with them into a disastrous conflict.
Or if you answer someone's desperate need for attention or validation, the way Duveen did with Arabelle Huntington, they might become an emotional black hole, demanding infinitely more energy, time, and emotional labor than you are willing or able to give.
The helpless inner child that you purposefully awaken in a target can very easily escalate into an uncontrollable tantrum that destroys the entire relationship and your plans along with it.
The central warning here is about the intoxicating nature of hubris. When you discover how relatively easy it can be to manipulate someone's hidden weaknesses, the feeling of control can become a drug.
You start turning thumbscrews just to see if you can, but the text firmly reminds the reader you are after power, not the thrill of control. Operating in the realm of raw emotion makes this perhaps the most unpredictable and volatile law in the entire book.
You think you are the fox managing the lion, but you might just startle the lion into rolling over and crushing you by accident.
Exactly that dynamic.
Well, this has been an incredibly intense journey through the darker mechanics of human nature. We started with the fable of the fox exploiting the lion's vanity at the edge of the chasm.
We explored how to spot the ooze of human behavior in everyday trifles, and how unfulfilled childhood needs create lifelong, hidden vulnerabilities.
We watched Cardinal Richelieu map the weak links of the French court to isolate a king, Victor Lustig sell a worthless wooden box for a fortune by filling a desperate social void, Catherine de Medicis weaponize the male need to conquer, and Bismarck manipulate a king's hidden shame to forge an empire.
It really all distills down to a quote from the 17th century philosopher Balthasar Gracian that the text highlights: knowing any man's mainspring of motive, you have, as it were, the key to his will.
It is a stark, Machiavellian reality of human interaction, but understanding this mechanism is absolutely essential for navigating the world.
Because while the text we explored today is entirely focused on using these tactics offensively to gain power and leverage over others, the real, tangible value for you listening to this is defensive.
You need to understand how the fox operates, so you don't end up at the bottom of the ravine wondering why you jumped.
And that leaves us with a lingering, somewhat uncomfortable thought to process. We've spent all this time analyzing historical figures, looking for the loose stones in their castle walls, judging their vanity and their fears.
But I want you to turn that analytical lens inward. Think about your own castle walls.
If an intelligent observer were watching your everyday trifles, noticing how you interact with service staff, noting what specific compliments make you glow, tracking what topics make you suddenly defensive or petty or childish, what would they decide is your thumbscrew?
What is your mainspring of motive? And more importantly, now that you are aware of it, does that make you immune?
That is a question to keep you up at night.
Keep your armor strong, watch your trifles, and we will see you on the next deep dive.